Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. And I have an unbelievable honor of having our next guest on in this episode. I've known Erica Novak for many, many years, going back to probably 2009, 2010 timeframe when you were a consultant at Brightfield way back when and doing research for some of the SIA programs. And so it's been a very long, I've got a long history, and Erica is one of my close friends in the industry. And I'm so excited to have her on the show.
Thank you. That's a big lead up, but I appreciate that. No, it's been really great to get to know you. Gosh, it's been a decade. That's crazy.
It is
I
crazy.
really appreciate you having me on and let me share my perspective.
So, this is a topic that does get talked about, but really doesn't get analyzed. And so the topic of percentage of spend versus subscription or licensing model within the contingent workforce technology space. And so I love the topic, and this would be for, our higher level listeners that will love hearing Erica's perspective on this. And Erica, what is awesome about you is your career and how you've worked as a buyer. You did consulting in the space with one of the top consulting firms out there. You went and ran one of the largest programs, software programs, the contingent programs at a software company. And then now you're actually working within the technology space. You were at Utmost and Beeline. So, I love the variation on perspectives and going from vendor side to client side and understanding both sides of the fence, right? Which is so important when we get to, when we're talking about pricing, because there's always two perspectives. So can you talk a little bit more about your career and some of the things you learned on this topic in particular, and that's influenced you on this topic?
Right. It's a heavy load, but let's see. No, I think and I appreciate your kind words. I've been really fortunate and lucky to have a couple of the opportunities that I've had. So like you said, I really started out when I think about working at the eBay program, and there was nothing in place. I got very lucky that I had a senior VP look at me and say, we should be doing more with you. Figure out how to build an internal VMS with international requirements, because we're going to build this within kind of our HR group. I feel like you can do it. Let's go. Had no background in CW outside of having been a contractor myself. So I remember back in the day, I was an ABE contractor.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Before they got bought by Workforce Law. So I had recognized and kind of felt, what does it mean? At this point I was at Google. So why can't I go to the all hands? And why does my badge a different color? And hey, there's some things I'm allowed to. So that was my really first entrance into what contracting was. And got really lucky that I had someone who believed in me and basically said, it's a hard problem. Go figure it out. Go talk to people, learn what we need. And so forth. And so, and one of those things that I, kind of without a net is I got to learn and work with my suppliers really closely. And I got to hear their concerns. And I think one of the biggest building blocks I've had from the eBay experience was not just defining international requirements, not just figuring out like a user experience, but to say, suppliers, how do you make money? What's important to you? How do you define the relationship? What have you seen go wrong? What's important if I'm looking at building and changing it? What do you guys need? And I've been really lucky because if I think about it, through even now almost 20 years of my relationship, some of those core suppliers I worked with back then have been suppliers I've worked with throughout my entire career and even now, because of relations that we have built and the idea of I need to build a program that makes them successful. If you don't have your supplier buy-in or understand how they make money and how they are going to serve you best, you have the most over-engineered program in the world that no one will use. This rogue manager is a bullshit term. It basically is you're not serving them, so they figured out how to go around you. Your program is meant to serve. Your program is meant to serve your managers and your suppliers. So I think when I think about my time at eBay, it really was bent on or spent on that mindset of it has to work within the ecosystem. You cannot be a deterrent. You have to be opening the gateway of talent, not closing it out for compliance. So eBay was a big experience in that relationship. why it matters, why it can't just be this black box rules.
Yep.
How do you need to make sure that it's your program and your strategy, not a third party's?
Yep.
And then I got really lucky. At that point, I'd been introduced to Brightfield at eBay. And when I was looking kind of for what my next play was going to be, was really fortunate. I think they found my boldness and an interesting skill set to have, and the idea that I really wanted to lean in and learn this industry more. At that point, I was just a buyer. And so when I joined Brightfield, it was still very niche consulting or whatnot. Again, what I got was my mind blown of, I got to then analyze the entire industry.
Yeah.
Across the technology, because the service providers, what was going on, worked a really close collaboration with SIA, got to meet great suppliers like yourself, and understanding what everyone was kind of after, and the thought process, and kind of the behind the scenes of what a buyer doesn't get to say. And that was really, really eye-opening. And then really working with Fortune 500 companies to say, here's how you should have done this. And you're kind of turning back the time, which is incredibly difficult, as many of these people who are probably listening as, you either got dropped into a program and told to change, or you're coming into something and saying, oh, if we only would have done this 6 years ago, how do we now move forward?
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to work in that mindset of saying, all right, take my ideas from a buyer and now what I've seen across the landscape, and try to say, all right, how do you work with a company when you don't know the people, but trying to give guidance, kind of influencing their executives to make a change, whether it's a service, a pricing model, a technology, but kind of turning it around and saying, here's what I think we should do, and here's what the roadmap was. So that was huge, because you really learn about influence. You really learn about what people care about, and it's cost, efficiency, compliance, right? Otherwise, I think we're in a spot where user experience and employee experience has got a lot of
you get hype, but when you boil a lot of it down on executive decision making, you nailed the three. That's three. Exactly right. As so ROI drivers, I would call it, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's cliche, but it's true. Those are not in your vernacular. They need to be. You need.
It's amazing that you gain that experience for being an outside consultant. Would usually that actually the consultant helps with the business case to sell something up the chain to executives. So that's amazing that it gave perspective. And then you went back to the buy side.
I did. I missed at that point, and any other consultant's going to know, you can only do what people are willing to pay for. So even if you see 7 other things that they're not going to pay for, you have to stop. And I really missed owning, and like, it's like a baby, right? Like it becomes yours and you shepherd. And so was really fortunate to work with LinkedIn. And it was such a happy marriage for me, an idea of talent and helping encourage employee workforce and non-employee workforce. And they were looking for a contingent workforce manager. And so I got to go back and take my learnings and kind of own a program from the get-go and really talk about philosophy. What do you want the philosophy of the program? What's the mission of the program? Build a cross-functional coalition and say, all right, what have people failed at before? And how do I start from the ground floor? And so again, I had a phenomenal time at LinkedIn, trying to modernize what a CW program can be within the talent acquisition world. And how does it work cross-functionally across the world, right? So at that point, we had, I think, 26 to 27 countries. I call it the whack-a-mole model, right? Where you don't actually have a formal program, but talent pops up somewhere and you have to figure out how to do it. So you have to nail it, and it goes away. It doesn't stay stable. Pops up over here. So you're playing whack-a-mole across the world with a standard program, and then something has to be nimble and move, knowing that the business doesn't sleep. You can't just rest on your laurels. It's always going to change and move. And you're going to be doing Mexico in one day, and you'll be going to do Argentina, then Paraguay, then India and Singapore. And these are all different rules, all different know-hows, and you're responsible for it. So that was, again, probably one of the most phenomenal times. And then it became, I had, again, we talk about chip on my shoulder. So ever since eBay, I've talked about total workforce. I've talked about, it's ludicrous to me to have employees here and non-employees over here, and no one's able actually to see and compare and look at a whole workforce. And so with LinkedIn, I took kind of a leap of faith, and I said, it's time to put my money where my mouth is. Yes, I'm a loud lady. But instead of just banging the door and saying other technologies meet my needs, I got very lucky and met a group of gentlemen out of Ireland and Silicon Valley who are looking to do something in the non-employee workforce. And so we joined forces and was able to really bring global workforce intelligence into the world and join a startup to say, this is important, the full visibility, the full picture of how work gets done, what is happening. I'm a big believer that visibility begets compliance, relationship, operational efficiency, but you have to have the full picture. And so moved over to the product side to bring something into the world that I wanted, I knew I'd seen others wanted as well. And so I was really lucky to kind of live out the dream of bringing GWI into the world, running a company, being part of the leadership team. And then, as most of you guys know, then becoming part of the Beeline family. So Beeline saw the vision. We had a really close alignment on what the North Star was around the worker visibility, and then joining the Beeline family. So it's also it's been a hell of a ride, but it's been phenomenal to understand from the tech side, from the consulting side, from the buyer side, what's important, how relationships matter, and what can get in the way of really good work.
Yeah. And so it's funny because we were just having a conversation and the topic of percentage of spend versus licensing came up in our last kind of just general catch-up conversations, and your passion for this topic came through like crazy. So, wanted to talk a little bit about the history of how this percentage of spend model came about in our space, because it's so prevalent and everything kind of defaults to that in general, right? But it's not really how technology is bought in other industries and other sectors. So even in the HR sector, right? So it was interesting having a conversation, but the history of this, the CW space, the contingent space, really got traction and legs and kind of, early 2000s, but really in 2008, 2009. And we all know what that was. It was a large recession. And so when it came to selling software, to try to sell software to procurement and charge them $500,000 in licensing fees at a time when they were laying off people in the organization wasn't a match, right? And so the whole idea of, well, I got an idea, let's turn it into a percentage of spend and masquerade it as free, was how it got pitched. And it ended up getting bought. And it was a scenario where it was percentage of spend. And by the way, it's going to be free because it's a vendor cost off of their invoice, the payment of their invoices. And so that's how it all kind of began and really caught traction, because not only, was it free, let's do that with air quotes, but by centralizing your contingent workforce and automating all the steps in that procure to pay process, of course, not only had the hard cost savings of efficiencies, but a lot of the other savings around, better rate management, visibility, all of these other things that we talked about, compliance and savings as drivers, really helped drive such savings. So it was all just ROI upside, and that's why you saw so much traction during that time frame, and continues to be today kind of the default model of how technology is bought. So our conversation, you almost had a chip on your shoulder about that, going, we're one of the only industries that does it that way. And so, this whole idea of percentage of spend, is it the right way? Is it the best way to buy software in our space? And you had a very interesting perspective on it and have been successful in implementing it a different way than the percentage of spend model. So kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on, the idea of a license model versus the percentage of spend model, and, best ways to implement an optimized program.
Yes. Oh, you can say it's a chip on the shoulder because it's something
it's a soapbox, let's say, that you'd love to perfect.
You invited me, I'm going to do it. I think a cloak of invisibility of a cost is not a way an industry should be built. If you have to hide your cost to get in the door, what value are you not able to provide? What buyer are you not able to convince? If I think about, and I understand the why, right? I understand, again, from a vendor perspective, the idea is how do I shorten these, especially for enterprise, these sales cycles are ridiculously long. And even with this percentage spend or it's free model, it's ridiculously long. So you need to get revenue in the doors. There's a lot of why, but I think for the buyers, I need you to understand it is typically in their best interest, not yours. Yes, it's potentially easier to sell because for the mind that's not being challenged, when you say it's free and you say, well, here's why, everyone says, oh, okay, that feels great, and on you go. But if I think about probably the unintended consequence of the percentage spend model, it does two things, or from what I've seen, again, like let's go over the past 12, 15 years. It's done two things that I think is hurtful for this industry. One is that it really limits what you can do with the technology outside of the Western world. If you think about when you're doing a procure to pay, or let's say a rec to check, if you think about the technology you want to use for the efficiencies, once you get outside of United States and Canada, and that's typically where everyone's implementing first because the spend is the highest. Ta-da! Then everyone goes UK and Ireland. And then it's a smattering others. India's gotten some more. If you're buying in Europe, you start to see other countries in Western Europe, but it stops. So I think about the percentage spend is you get it up and running, and then because the rest of the world has not bought into this model, doesn't like this model, in some ways it's illegal for this model, you actually can't get the full visibility that you're looking for because the technologies and the services providers are not motivated to expand outside of a USD currency volume based. So your hopes are to go phase 1 through X, and maybe you get to phase 2 and then you stop because there's no motivation to serve the rest of the world. Again, if I think about a program like at LinkedIn, we talked about the whack-a-mole model. We talked about having 26 countries. We think about how we work alongside with HCMs. Your HCM is going to go across. Your non-employee technology should also go across and likely into other areas that your HCM's not in. Because usually as companies are expanding into other markets and other countries, non-employees come first. Independent contractors, a leader, a contractor, they're the ones who typically are hired first because they haven't built a business entity around it. And you're based on this percentage spend model, I think you actually limit and get stuck. So that's one. The second area I would say it actually is limiting to the career of the CW owner. When I think about a total, you and I had talked about this, is every other technology owner, let's just use HR even versus procurement, have had to build a business case, had to show what the ROI is going to be, works with finance on total cost of ownership, and then it gets reevaluated. The other thing they're in is they're in a ton of other meetings with other application owners, so they know exactly what the roadmaps across the enterprise. IT recognizes that this is a system that should be supported. Usually there's a system analyst, and they're in these meetings that you are not in. So because you've hidden it and you think that you're sneaky and smarter, and that's the language these vendors are giving everyone, you're smarter than everyone else, it's free, you've actually created a gap where the cloak of invisibility actually is around your career, your program. No one sees it, so they don't care. So I think the unintended consequence of really focusing on this free, which is not free, we'll go into the errors of that later, actually prohibits you from moving your career and your program into what you actually wanted to, and the first reason why you bought the system. So sorry.
Interesting thing about this is, there's the MSP, which tends to be more on the services side. And now we're talking technology and the VMS. But other technologies are moving into this space too, and they're all trying to figure out their pricing models, right? And other services as well. When you think about direct sourcing, you've got the direct sourcing technologies, and can you do that on a licensing basis versus a SaaS revenue model versus a percentage of spend model? Even in EOR, tech-enabled EOR, you're starting to see the technology platforms coming in with a fixed monthly fee per person versus a percentage. So you're starting to see that change. Why, and put your client hat on and then also the vendor hat, and maybe have to give two perspectives, but why would you choose one model over the other? And some cases you have to. And I know your passion towards the subscription, but what are some of the drivers that make you choose one model over the other?
I think there's a couple if I'm the buyer. And it depends on the level and the, I think, aptitude and comfortability of the buyer first. So percentage spend from a buyer is kind of what you're educated is the norm, right? So especially if you're new to the industry,
Yeah.
do you want to buck the norm? Are you doing something crazy? I think there's nervousness, a perceived imposter syndrome where it comes. I'm just going to go with the flow. These are what the vendors are pitching to me. That's how we do it. I'm just going to go with it, right? I think the other idea is, yeah, do you have a budget? Most programs are considered a cost center, right? And so it's really hard to ask for money, or you need to be really crystal clear, right? It's not a benefits program, right? It's not the payroll system of record. So you need to have a very clear business case. So if you're feeling, I think with people who are newer, if they're newer, they're one person, they don't have a lot, you're kind of going to go with what is handed to you, which is typically what the vendor thinks makes the most sense and has closed the most deals. So on one hand, you just kind of say, great, I've now learned what this industry is required. It seems pretty easy to me. I can get this done without a lot of input, right? I'm not asking for integrations. I don't have to ask for money. I don't have to get approved. I can just kind of implement this as long as I have the resources. And then you usually push on the resources. So I think the new buyer, I believe, is nervous. Here's what's supposed to happen. So therefore, a more seasoned buyer may have more political issues that they're dealing with and saying, I want this, I need this, I'm overtaxed, no one else sees this. I'm just going to get my job done, right, in this manner, and not have to worry about jumping through all the bureaucracy, like the hoops.
Yeah.
So part of it, I think, also is the speed for the buyer as well, because potentially they haven't talked about the additional work that's happening or done the math on how much time, effort, energy, what laws are required to be followed. They don't have the ear of someone. Usually what I hear from CW program owners is, no one cares. I don't have a seat at the table. No one cares about these problems. The HR team thinks it's a procurement problem. Oh, you're on a procurement? My procurement team thinks it's an HR problem. No one wants me, so therefore I'm going to buy myself and get this done.
Yeah.
Okay. On the vendor side, absolutely you want the path of least resistance. How do I get this done? Who doesn't like free money? Who doesn't like to have someone else pay for it, right? And so you think about on the percentage spend, it's the great, I can get in the door. The salesperson is motivated just to get in the door, not the 7th-year plan.
So unfortunately, we have to wrap this up, but we could probably talk more and more and more. And in wrapping this up, thinking, I'm a program manager, either new or existing, let's call it, and you've just sparked my interest in doing an evaluation to understand my pricing model, right? To evaluate my pricing with the percentage of spend versus if I went to my vendor community, whatever the technology is that I'm buying across, be it the VMS, be it direct sourcing technology, et cetera, what are the steps that I take to do an evaluation and start to understand, how should I buy this and what should I be paying for this software?
It's do your homework, right? So first step of homework is go to hopefully it's a relationship. Hopefully it's talk to your technology salesperson and say, here's what I'm looking to do. What do you think you can do for me? He'll have something, he or she will have something or whatnot. Then you're going to go to some of your competitors because they're going to have business cases, they're going to have ideas, and you want to figure out how to benchmark, right? Work with your procurement team and say, here's what we're doing, right? So again, it's about collecting information about what your options are. Pricing models are made up. They're made up. They're volatile and they can change. So what are the options that you have to you, right? So that's the first one. Understand what partners, how do you actually pull information in? If you have good benchmarking people, ask them. Now, don't ask them for the price. That is disrespectful. Sometimes it's against the law. They can't give you, here's exactly what I'm paying, but you can say, here's the model that I'm using and here's why. Second part is, especially if you already have a technology in place versus not, because that is different. When you don't, you're guessing. I think I have this much, and there's some math you can do, but let's use the example of you already have. Understand, let's go with headcount, number of suppliers, requisitions, and then cost, right? I don't love the spend model. That's where we are today. That's fine. Understand, like, what do you actually have today? And also, what do you think that is not in the system that you can potentially go after? Because then you're going to be able to, everyone's going to be able to go with pricings based on what is and what is hoped to be, right? You can't say, what will you price me for if I don't have any, I have no idea what I have. You're asking them to do an unreasonable math formula. And then you as the buyer are using that as a baseline to push them down further when there's no information. That's not fair. What do you actually have, right? And then you go and you look at the value again. Let's go back, right? What are the efficiencies? What are the savings? What compliance needs are you making? What things are you not having to pay for because you're not doing things against the law or misclassifying? And then start putting pen to paper on examples. And you can start to see like what the value that you want is. But on this exercise, it gets a nice mathematical formula that your finance team, your procurement team is absolutely able to help you. Your other HR partners can give you examples of what's going on. But it starts to put together that picture of what are you trying to serve and do, right? What are the efficiencies? What are the savings? And what are the compliance needs? Compliance is a good trigger. Everyone can't break the law. So like that's sometimes the first one. In this economy, savings is usually the second.
Yep.
Third ends up being usability, user experience, connectivity, or whatnot. Those are all things that everyone wants, but the first two are people things have to have. So be aware of how you pitch it in what order. But again, I go back to like, what are the models? What's the math? And what is happening currently today? Yeah. And if you changed and transitioned, how do you do it in a way that is beneficial? Doesn't have to be equality of benefit, but your technology partner has to see that this is good for them as well. So how do you make a change together? So it's a relationship and they don't just feel like, of course, you're trying to ask them for 45% off in this actually way. There's a way you're able to do it together to make the change. Everyone's really happy about the long term, right? Maybe you're giving instead of a 3-year contract, if you make the change, it becomes a 5-year contract. So they have revenue recognized in a stable way for a longer period of time. That's great. That's easy to give if you really like
win-win, right?
So win-win. Yeah. So those are the 3 things I say to do first. And then hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll tell you the rest.
Awesome. Well, Erica, this has been very thought-provoking session of Ask the Expert. And, you know, you've always been one to drive change in our industry and drive change for the better. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been awesome chatting with you and look forward to what you're going to be doing in the future.
Thanks, Jeff. This has been great. Appreciate it.